really excited to introduce someone I believe is a great stateswoman, Dr. Laura Tyson. Formerly served in the Clinton administration, both as the director of the National Economic Council and as the chairwoman of the Council of Economic Advisors. Quite the unusual combination. Just goes to her strengths as an economist and as a thought leader in economic policy. She's now at the University of California at Berkeley, where she's, go Bears! I'm not a bear, but I want to get with the flow. She's the director of the Institute for Business and Social Innovation and has a fantastic book that just came out called After Piketty, which we will plug 2 or 3 times throughout this short session. So let me invite Dr. Tyson up on stage along with Steve Clemons and Rebecca Rosen from The Atlantic.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much, Steve. Laura, it's great to have you here. Becca, great to be with you again. Let's have a fun conversation. Laura, I actually knew you before you became such a big deal. And
I had my moment.
So when she was sort of down at the bottom of one part of her bell curve of her life, she was a professor of economics at the Berkeley Roundtable on International Economy, worked with people like John Zeisman, Mark Boris, and Laura was one of the really outstanding thinkers in the country about what that equilibrium between industrial policy and private sector, how to get these things right. We were talking about this last night. And when you joined the Clinton administration, a lot of that stuff just got left on the table. And Bill Clinton was riding the wave of the IT boom, but a lot of that structural stuff kind of got neglected. And I'm interested in whether you think we'd be in a different place today if we'd had more Tysonism and less maybe Rubenomics.
First of all, I think that to some extent, it was taken up in the following. Here's an example. You will remember that we did a lot of work initially on US-Japan trade strategy. So a lot of that was to deal with access barriers to try to make sure that production located in the United States, high-tech production, manufacturing production, had access to then a very important market. I think there are similarities right now to thinking about access barriers in the China market. And if I were to sort of do, it's kind of trade come industrial policy. I would say we also did a lot of work, and again, I think there's an industrial policy component to this with DARPA, and out of DARPA, of course, came ultimately EARPA. A lot of what the government, we talked a lot about dual-use technology at the time, a lot of support for defense-related R&D or big challenges for society addressed through DARPA or EARPA are U.S.
So bottom line, Tysonomics did win.
I know. I'm just saying we had some examples of industrial
God, you're
policy.
usually not this modest.
You know, I think it's really interesting to think about right now, thinking about, so let's go to a big theme right now. It's the decline of manufacturing. But of course, manufacturing has not declined as a share of GDP. It has, manufacturing employment has continued to decline in the US as in other advanced industrial countries. Manufacturing employment as a share of total employment has declined. It seems to me that the evidence has now been coming in, and it's been coming in for years, and it wasn't as clear-cut at all in the mid-1990s as it is now, that so much of that decline in employment, if that's what you were worried about, was the result of changing the production processes of manufacturing. So that basically you have all the productivity growth being driven by automation and modern equipment. You have the employment growth disappearing. You have the US as a powerhouse in certain parts of the manufacturing industry.
You've written about how those technological changes are kind of splitting the US labor market right now into this bipolar distribution. Was that an inevitable change, or were there, in retrospect, were there policies or other approaches to our economy that we could have smoothed this a bit?
So first of all, this concept, this is not original to me, and I want to give full credit to an economist at MIT who's been very influential on me, and that is David Autor. And David has done a tremendous amount of work over many years documenting what he calls polarization, and by that it is that middle income jobs, middle skill jobs as a share of total jobs declines. You have high-skilled jobs in a growing economy. Look, when you have a big recession, even that stops. But in a cyclically normal economy, when you're in a prosperity phase, you're going to have high-skilled job growth at the top. You're going to have a lot of labor-intensive activities which don't require a lot of skill, but don't necessarily mean a lot of automation either. But the middle, and here's the answer to your question a little bit, is that's happening everywhere.
Yeah.
So I think the US, we did not do a good job. So my other sort of favorite economists on this are Larry Katz at Harvard and Claudia Golden, his partner. And I mean, they would say it wasn't just in the US, just the technology, but it was the failure of skills and education to keep up with the technology. We probably could have had more growth in the upper skill. There might have actually been less income growth, or less wage growth, because essentially you'd be creating more supply. You'd be creating more workers who have the ability to work with that technology as opposed to be substituted for that technology. If you create more workers with that skill, you're likely to bring down the very, very extreme skill premium that we have in the United States. We really do have quite a dramatic skill premium between, say, a college-educated worker and a high school-educated worker. You can narrow that somewhat by working on the supply of skills. But I don't think you can I think we all have to think about the serious issue of, as machines become more capable of doing routine, cognitive, as well as physical. First they became good at doing routine physical jobs. Now they're getting good at doing routine cognitive jobs. And you know what? The cognitive thing is creeping up.
So Skynet's coming.
I've never been, I don't even know, I'm not a science fiction person, so I tend to go to McKinsey Global Institute, okay? It's not science fiction, although I did see Wonder Woman yesterday, okay? It was about women, and I was with my husband, and I thought,
I'm just really
Wonder
impressed
Woman.
you knew Skynet was science fiction.
Anyway, so the McKinsey people they've been following this, McKinsey Global Institute, so it's the think tank part of McKinsey, and I really would recommend, if you're interested in this topic, looking at some of their publications. Their most recent one in January, they did 25 or 6 countries, I think, and about 80 different occupations. And they said, with current technology, not futuristic, not the next 5 years, with current technology, something like 1/3 of all the things that workers do in their jobs could be done by a machine. 1/3.
Right.
Okay? So now this means, okay, well then how do we define what a worker is doing? How do we decide how a worker is paid? How do we organize our business to take advantage of this? And I think we don't have answers to those issues. We have a growing number of people who are independent workers. They're not working on standard employment contracts. They're working part-time in part because they are only needed part-time. The machine does other things.
So the answer that some people say we need is a universal basic income platform. Do you support that?
So some people say that, and I think we need to, since I think we need to start acting relatively speedily, I don't see how we get from here to there politically. I just, remember, there's one universal basic income project going on in the world, and it's going on right now in Kenya, and I think it's 22 cents a day. So basically, a universal basic income to make sense in the United States, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about $12,000? Are we talking about $15,000? You cannot, with our set of policies and our revenue base, get there. So I personally feel that right now we should be looking at, and I know Mark Warner, he didn't talk about this, but he's very active in this area. Let's think about systems which give workers portable, universal benefits that are prorated. So for example, if you end up in a part-time job, so then you could say what it should be, okay? Right away, you could say, all right, I like the idea of prorated, so you go into work 70% time, and your employer, and you're going to put some contribution in, and your employer's going to put some contribution, and then you may go work for somebody else. So prorated, universal, that is everybody working has access. And portable, you get to, it goes with the worker. It doesn't say with the employer in any way. Then you can start to say, okay, well, which benefits? Okay, now clearly if we had a universal or a single payer healthcare system or an individual insurance market that actually worked, then we'd have a societal sort of we'd have a societal provision of health care, and then you could talk about what support should either come from the company or the government. But if we don't have that, yeah, health is going to be pretty crucial to that. Pension opportunities are going to be pretty crucial to that. And I actually think education and training should be crucial to that.
But the basic idea here is we built a lot of our social policies on an era where jobs were the norm.
We did.
And we tied all these benefits to the idea of a job. And at some level, we have to decouple them.
We have to at least refigure them. In some case, so what I was sort of thinking is, okay, let's keep it with work. There are two different debates here, okay? One is if you want to keep it with work, but the form of work is changing.
Right.
So that's why you need a new system. So some people said maybe we have individual security accounts for every single person, and when they're working for someone in some capacity, they make a contribution, and the hirer, I won't call him an employer, it's hard to, let's call him an employer, makes a contribution. So that would be a concept. That's one way to do it. That is different from the notion of suppose we just end up with a whole bunch of people unemployed because of the technology. I tend to think that what we're going to end up with, what I worry about more is not technological unemployment, but actually the fact that technology will undermine the level of income. I like to say it's not that we'll lack jobs, it's that we'll lack a lot of good jobs.
Right.
Okay?
I mean, are we maybe already experiencing that?
I think we've experienced, that erosion of the middle. So when people say, oh, I don't think that's going to happen, you know, you're too futuristic, I say, actually, just look at the last 30 years, because as the middle was falling out as a share of total employment, the other thing that was happening is the productivity was growing rapidly, but the average wage or the median wage was not. So for the first time, sort of what economists always want to say is productivity growth is great because it's the driver of living standards, and everybody will share in this. Well, actually what's happened is as we've sort of changed employment and changed the power of unions and changed a whole bunch of things in the labor market, the wage has not anywhere kept up with the rate of growth of productivity.
In a way, low wages are just another representation.
Low wages would be another representation.
Yeah.
That's right. So the level and the rate of growth are both an issue here. Yep.
Laura, for years you've been an advocate of greater investment in infrastructure.
Yes.
I had a question earlier from my friend Kate Howard saying, you know, from her view that there were a dearth of bankable projects, there was a problem of pipeline, and I'm just sort of interested in what the real story is on infrastructure. And we, you know, it's thrown out there as a term, a strategy, a way to bolster the middle class. We've been talking about this during the Obama administration.
Right.
We're now in the Trump administration. Can you give us just a 1-minute survey of what's truth, what's fiction, whether infrastructure is a legitimate, important path for the economy, and will we ever move forward on it?
So, all right, I certainly believe that infrastructure is got a big multiplier, so that's government spending. If you want to think about you're trying to stimulate the economy, this is a really good measure. I think that I'm convinced that the evidence that infrastructure has an effect on competitiveness and productivity and export. So there's a long-term growth benefit, there's a short-term employment benefit. So I'm definitely in favor of an increase in infrastructure investment, not to mention the fact that we keep getting Ds on our overall performance measures from civil engineers. The issue of how to finance it is really the issue where you get to bankable projects. And I would say the following. I actually think, I've been convinced, because I did work on 2 commissions for President Obama, there actually is a lot of private money out there that would like to invest in U.S. infrastructure, including, by the way, big pension funds, including some of the union pension funds. So the issue is that they won't cover all kinds of projects because you want a project which has a revenue stream that is going to generate a return. And of course, if you put a tax credit in, you're actually reducing the return that it has to generate. So maybe that generates more private money to come in. But there's going to be some infrastructure that the private solution doesn't exist. Now, as far as the bankable projects, I think this is an issue for the reason that basically the way infrastructure is done in the United States is primarily through state and local governments. And state and local governments do not have a lot of capacity to build, oh, here's several projects, here's the terms of the projects, let's sit down with the private investors and negotiate the deal. It is really hard to do. And I think we in the Obama administration argue that what we should have is a set of federally, major projects of federal interest. And actually, that would be a way where the federal government could work with the state or regional government saying, look, we should be building the airports and port authority of the city of New York. Okay, this is a national issue. It's not just a New York issue. So this is a federal project. The federal government has the capacity to actually work on the deals with the private sector.
Isn't one of the challenges going to be, though, that, I mean, we're seeing, we were talking about this in our last session, this kind of split economy geographically with some areas of really dynamic growth and some areas of real stagnation. Isn't it challenging to the federal government to choose how to prioritize where you put money, like whether throw money at the places that are doing well because they're going to do more with it, or put money into places that are struggling because they need a boost?
Well, it depends upon what, again, then I think you have to go to the level of what infrastructure are you talking about, okay? If you're talking about waterways, which is actually one of the ones that the Trump administration talked about, there's lots of benefits to waterway infrastructure that I think are spread out pretty evenly across the country, okay? Whereas if you're talking about, I mentioned Port Authority, as a major, or the ports of California, where major amounts of trade is going in and out. So they have a national role to play that is much beyond their state and regional. But I think that you could, there are projects on the important to-do list of infrastructure that are not all in the big urban centers of the United States. There really are. So the thing that's amazing to me and just frustrating, really frustrating, is there at the level of state and local governments and at the level of bipartisan, you go to any bipartisan, the owners, the businesses and workers agree on the need for infrastructure. The Democrats and the Republicans agree on the need for infrastructure. The states agree on the need for infrastructure. And yet, the issue of it gets caught up in Congress with how do you finance it? What amount is government spending? When we had the idea of a national infrastructure bank, it was, well, is it right to leverage government money with private money? I think the answer is yes, but there's political arguments about that. And then, by the way, there really is this fundamental issue. A lot of people, while they're for infrastructure, are not for infrastructure that is fee-based, that you have to pay something for the use of the infrastructure.
Easy pass.
Yeah, we should not have, gas taxes really don't work. There should be a fee based on the use of the infrastructure. That's the right solution. But then you get into the political morass.
So, Laura, my DC intelligence network has reported back to me that they saw you at the Hay Adams Hotel having lunch with Gary Cohn, whom we'd invited here today, and he was hosting all the national economic advisors who had served previous presidents. So who didn't show up, and what did you guys talk about?
Well, I have no idea how you know that, and we all agreed that it was not on the record, so I think I will say nothing about it.
What did you flirt with? Who didn't show?
I really, you have to get your sources to give more. I actually do believe in the desirability of having off-the-record discussions. So why would I make that public?
Okay, well, anyway, in our just last minute, you have participated in a volume that's just come out in kind of response to sort of thinking about Thomas Piketty.
Yes.
I'd love to hear, just give us a 1-minute synopsis of your slug at at plate, and what you thought is important to raise with regards to Piketty, his contributions, and changing the terms of the economic debate.
So this is it's written by economists. It's going to be a bestseller. I mean, jumping off the shelves.
Does it have a good title?
After Piketty.
You heard it here first.
There are a lot of people looking, this was a major work, and it will continue to be a major work, basically making the argument that there are some absolutely central structural characteristics of capitalism that lead to increasing income inequality and increasing wealth concentration. And that policymakers should know that and therefore need to take action. And then there's more about how policymakers may have encouraged it rather than discouraged it. So his book is definitely important to understand. I read the book at the same time that I read another book called The Second Industrial Revolution. And the Second Industrial Revolution was making the kind of arguments I made at the beginning, the importance of technology to understanding not just job creation, but income generation. So I suggested to the editors that there be an essay that talked about technology as the driver of income inequality. To what extent has it been a driver in the last 30 years? And since Piketty was looking forward to the future, to what extent is it a driver going forward? I personally think that Piketty underplays the significance of it. I think for the reasons I said, it's been a major driver in the past. And now looking forward, you have income inequality. We talked about the difference between high-skilled workers and low-skilled workers in a disappearing middle. The biggest contribution to income disparity in the United States is disparity in labor incomes. It's not capital incomes. It's disparity in labor income. So if technology is driving that, it's going to be a major force on income inequality.
So after Piketty, you heard it here, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank Becca Rosen for
thank you
joining
very
me
much.
in these conversations.
Thank you.
Becca Rosen of The Atlantic.
Very nice.
And Laura Tyson, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Dr. Tyson, thank you.
Thank you.